I am going to straightforwardly address the 4 questions that are posed, which is perhaps somewhat predictable since I did help write them. I wrote out what I was going to say because I think just to be concise. I'm not reprising too much of Which Way Is Left, and I'm curious, how many people have read Which Way Is Left? Okay, so a number of people. I will allude to it a bit and can clarify some of the concepts if people need that. And I want to just point out one other paper that's on the black table that's called The Life of the Party, Thoughts on What We're Trying to Build by Khalil Hassan, and I draw some from that in these remarks. So, the first question, why do we need a broad-based, multi-issue revolutionary organization or party? So I'd like to look at one situation where such a party could have made a difference, and that is New Orleans. One of the biggest domestic disasters of the past century that made millions of people question whether this government can or wants to act in the interest of the masses of people. And the people questioning were not only the black community, who were most adversely affected by it and have historically the most reason to be distrustful of the U.S. state, but very much mainstream white folks and others were asking this question. Now, what do the progressive forces there, so that's sort of an opening, right, that came out of New Orleans. What did the progressive forces do in relation to that? Different sectors. Churches, both the national leaderships of churches and rank-and-file initiatives of congregations did tremendous people-to-people aid, which I'm not putting down at all. That is a very important part of what must happen. Anarchist activists, revolutionary nationalists, some socialists also did kind of direct action solidarity, working with some of the black organizations in New Orleans. But nobody had the capacity to build a nationwide campaign to pressure the nation state, which I would argue is the only entity that had the capacity to prevent what is happening, has happened in New Orleans, which is the effective destruction of the historic black community of New Orleans and the overall diminution of working class presence in the city. Many of our socialist groups and other groups tried to help. We formed small, not very deeply based coalitions. We argued among ourselves, as we always do, but no way could we be strong enough to demand renovate and reopen, don't demolish public housing in any effective way. No way could we say reopen public schools and make them of higher quality and force that to happen. No way could we say organize return and resettlement at a pace and on a scale to rebuild the previous black and working class communities, not just a few individual houses that left families saying, what is it, there's nothing to come home to here. So we, as a left, had no capacity to do that. And I want to make a point here about 2 concepts that are very central to Which Way Is Left, which is what we call the party left and the social movement left. The party left being those who consciously identify as left or socialist and want to overturn the whole system, and usually are in, have been in, want to be in groups that believe that. And the social movement left being people involved in movements against oppression or for democratic rights who don't necessarily hold that conscious identification or the goal of overturning the system as a whole. But the party left and the social movement left are not 2 separate entities. In fact, they actually interpenetrate and shape each other's development in a classic kind of dialectical way, beyond the fact that obviously party leftists are in the social movement left, which we all know. So in the Katrina crisis, not only was there no national party, but the local social movement left was weak and divided too, and it couldn't give direction to potential allies for a national campaign. There was not a strong, on-the-ground, deeply rooted black liberation movement with an embracing internationalist sense, right? Instead you had fragmented, small, and often, not always, sort of patriarchal, one-manist, sometimes very narrowly nationalist groups not oriented to reaching out to immigrant communities and other allies. So with all this, the weakness of the party left and the social movement left, we had no structures or plans in place to organize, to further expose the white supremacist capitalist nature of the state, and then to win gains with and for the people. But the ruling class always has a plans and a set of ideas ready. Somebody bombed the World Trade Center, you know. We've been wanting to do Iraq, let's do it. We have that plan from 3 years ago, let's get it out. New Orleans is devastated, kids dispersed, buildings are destroyed. Hey, let's close some public schools and open a bunch of charter schools. Great opportunity, let's do it. I know that we don't have the resources and we can't plan in the way that the ruling class does, but we have to start thinking beyond our current puny state that we're in right now. We know that what changes the consciousness of masses of people are often big events that we don't control, but we'll never be able to take advantage of those events if we don't have some plans and structures in place. And in that regard, I just think in this period it's particularly important to do analytical work around global warming, climate change, ecological effects, and food and fuel prices, and how these are going to affect the living standards and lives of people in our country, who's likely to be hardest hit. I think we ought to do some real kind of thinking about that and about what responses to that could be. So the second question is, what should the party look like? Among what sectors should it be based? I'm going to just respond quickly and schematically, drawing from the Life of the Party paper. It will not be an electoral party, but one that leads the struggles of the oppressed and dispossessed. It must be deeply rooted among poorer sector workers who are mainly of color and often women, also in the unionized sector of the working class, among sympathetic middle strata who often drive the peace movement and civil liberties work and student organizing, among progressive LGBTQ folks, and even among small farmers and lower income rural people, ultimately, if we're talking about a nationwide organization or organizations. It will need to relate to elections in a real rather than merely symbolic way, perhaps through electoral fronts or fusion, or working with some other new and specifically electoral party. But we know that in the US, you can't be both an electoral party and a struggle party due to the way the system is constructed. A struggle party or parties of the dispossessed will need to have a membership of hundreds of thousands to be significant. It must encourage ongoing internal education, discussion, and the formation of principled tendencies, since we all know that we all are people who like to disagree and discuss stuff. It must be as open as possible while recognizing that repression is a constant of US history, especially against the Puerto Rican movement, immigrants from the global South and Asia, against Native Americans, against African Americans. And it must have plans to protect its members, allies, and work, which would mean different things in different regions and parts of the country and different practices on that basis. How might such an organization develop? This is, of course, the hardest question, and people sometimes criticize Freedom Road for not having kind of more of a plan on this, but A, we're not that smart, and B, we don't think that actually any one group could really come up with the line of march and vision that we all need for this. This has to be a product of a very broad kind of discussion. But I don't want to cop out, so I'll give one example of the kind of work that could help prepare the ground for a powerful organization of the dispossessed. And I'm wondering if people have heard of the Right to the City, and if anyone in here works with Right to the City?
Yeah.
Yes? Yeah. Some people do. Okay. Great. Terrific. So I just say a little bit, and people can say more in discussion if you like. This is a network that some of my comrades and others helped to found, of 50 organizations in 8 cities, all based among lower strata workers who are overwhelmingly of color and a high percentage of women. They got together first around sharing the lessons of their struggles against gentrification. That was the constant. And its effect on lower strata workers. And they saw then that their organizing kind of organically broadened into other issues, such as democratic decision-making around the use of urban space, including parks and playgrounds, immigrants' rights as workers and community members and tenants, wages, benefits, and rules of the workplace, local and state minimum wage, effects of the world's highest incarceration rates on urban communities. The groups then found themselves building ties with the left networks of labor unions through Jobs with Justice, probably another group that people know, right? Central labor councils of their cities, participating in coalitions to elect local officials who would carry out their demands locally, always with constant struggle, and strategizing with their coalition partners around, like, what do we need to do in a 20-year frame to make this a better city for working class people, to make working class organization more powerful in this city? Do we need to organize this key industrial sector of the city, for example? Trying to think together about those kinds of questions, which, you know, we seldom do really try to think in that long-term way together. The leaders of the groups tend to be college-educated and consciously anti-capitalist folks who make a real effort to build democratic practices and ongoing political education and discussion inside the base groups. Because, you know, you don't want a situation where the leader of the group says, yeah, we're part of Right to the City, but nobody in the group actually knows what Right to the City is, because that's easy enough to do, right? And you don't want to have that. And there's a conscious effort to mitigate against that. So these types of linked networks of groups with real mass bases at the local level could help lay the basis, I think, for the kind of party that we need. I wouldn't expect, or I don't think anyone does that, there would be some kind of even process when you look nationally in scope, right? Because things are going to be more advanced in some places than in others. So if you look at the cities where they have Right to the City, for example, it's cities which are economically dynamic in this era, and therefore they attract immigration, and they also have kind of historic working class communities of Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, African Americans as well, and the groups are very much focusing on building alliances and ties and real mutual understanding between those different communities. That's a very important part of it. I also would say, you know, I think everybody would agree with this, right? That it's kind of hard to impact a city like New York, and I actually don't think this is going to be the most advanced place to first develop this sort of thing, because it's just so hard to have any effect, and you need such force to do that. The last part that just briefly is the last question. What should be the relationship between a revolutionary organization and the mass social movements? And this I got naturally at the end of my time and stopped writing. So this is not a simple question, actually, because it's human nature to be a little resentful when you find that there's people in something that you're in that are also in something else and you're not in it. So you feel excluded, right? And like, what is it? What is this other thing, right? So that is always something that just on a human level, people in a revolutionary organization will have to deal with in the mass social movements. And I remember something told to me by Annette Rubinstein, one of the people who built this school and a beloved mentor to a lot of us. And Annette said that in the 30s, the people in the CP, like when they talk to other people in the unions or the community group, I'd like to tell you about, this is who I am, this is something that I believe in, that is needed over the long term. I'd like to dialogue with you about it. I'd like to win you to it if possible. But if I can't win you to it, I'm not going to, like, you know, ram it down your throat or try to impose its line and program on this mass group that we're in, or pick up my marbles and just go home. You know, in Freedom Road, we always struggle with this issue of openness because, you know, a lot of times when someone says they're in a socialist group, it's like they're out there selling news here. It's like, oh God, I don't want them to think I'm like the people selling newspapers, so I'm not going to say it right now. What am I going to do? But we just tell ourselves that we kind of need sort of more of a combination of both kind of boldness and also humility will kind of work better. So on that end, so we can have more discussion.